Released 1 year after Circle of the Moon on the Game Boy Advance, the subject of today's video is going to be covering Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, released back on the Game Boy Advance in 2002 by Konami. This was the first Castlevania handheld game that was spearheaded by one of the top developers of the entire Castlevania franchise, Koji Igarashi. Unsatisfied with the progress of Circle of the Moon, he instead decided to take the helm and redirect the games in terms of the visuals, story, and the style of gameplay he wanted to see from his work on Symphony of the Night. Now, if you guys watched my previous review on Circle of the Moon, you'll know right off the bat that I think it's a pretty average Castlevania game, and definitely not one of the better games in the series. For those of you guys who know the Castlevania series, before I even say anything about Harmony of Dissonance, this game already has a reputation as being one of the weaker Castlevania titles, especially the Metroidvania games. And I'm here to tell you guys up front, despite any fans of this title, this is once again another very average Castlevania game that it does a lot more things worse than Circle of the Moon. I can praise Harmony of Dissonance for right off the bat is the art direction and the visuals. Koji Igarashi wasn't kidding when he said he wanted to create a visually stimulating experience for Castlevania fans on the Game Boy Advance. There's a very unique pixel art style that incorporates some 3D elements that really makes this game pop out on the system. I'm extremely impressed with how it looked both on the GBA and in the Anniversary Collection, available now if you're interested in playing it that way. But the visuals look really nice. Colors are bright and poppy. Each area of Dracula's castle that you explore is highly detailed. Enemies are animated and alive with that 3D polygon aesthetic, given the fact we're dealing with pixel art on a handheld console. Character models look very responsive. Attacks, moves, spells, anything that you're able to attack or cast within the game looks very fluid, and the boss fights are extremely well animated and alive, along with extremely detailed backgrounds, regardless of which area of Dracula's castle you're exploring, like the clock tower, the underground waterways, or quite frankly any other area. Koji Igarashi succeeded in his goal of making this game visually look awesome, especially compared to what happened with Circle of the Moon a year prior. However, this came at a cost. This is one of the worst soundtracks I've heard in a Castlevania game, Game Boy Advance game, or any video game I've played, period. I'm not going to knock this soundtrack too much because it's already notorious in the gaming community, and anyone who's played Harmony of Dissonance knows how terrible the soundtrack really is. There's a few standouts here and there that sound halfway decent, but the problem is the entire soundtrack sounds like an old NES chiptune style soundtrack that you heard 3 console generations prior back in the 1980s. And unfortunately, this is what was sacrificed in order to make the game visually look good. Koji Igarashi later confirmed in later interviews that due to the fact they had so much focus on the visuals and it took up so much hardware space and time of the development team, that the soundtrack unfortunately wasn't given the proper attention that every other major Castlevania game in the series accomplished. Even Circle of the Moon, for all the flaws I pointed out in that review, the soundtrack in that game is really good, especially given it was the first major Castlevania handheld title on the Game Boy Advance. Unfortunately, Harmony of Dissonance looks great in the visual department, but the soundtrack of this game is terrible. Castlevania series isn't notorious for having in-depth stories like a lot of other video game series out there, but for what it's worth, Harmony of Dissonance has a decent story to it, unlike Circle of the Moon. Harmony of Dissonance is actually canon to the overall series, featuring Juiced Belmont, the descendant of Simon Belmont from the earlier NES titles, as he journeys through Dracula's castle upon hearing that his best friend Maxim, who came back from a traveling journey in order to get stronger, reveals to him that despite his amnesia, he knows that Count Dracula is on the verge of a rising, remembering that he went to retrieve Dracula's body parts and some ancient artifacts, but Castlevania has once again risen. Along with their childhood friend Leiby being kidnapped, Juice proceeds to go through Dracula's castle, encountering death, and uncovering the secret of how Count Dracula is back, and why are there two duplicates of the castle. Again, this isn't the most in-depth story, especially even by Castlevania standards, but for what it is, it's a decent story. The character of Juice is pretty good to see, another generation of the Belmonts going and taking down Dracula. They do a unique spin on how Castlevania is laid out with two duplicate castles, and this time around, you're not really fully fighting Dracula. Rather, at the end of the game, you're fighting a wraith of Dracula made up of his decomposed body parts that you gather throughout the castle. Quite frankly, this story has some halfway decent twists to it that make for some very intriguing set pieces later on, compared to other titles. Once again, not even a knock on the game entirely. This isn't really the most in-depth story in the world. It works for the game, but it's not going to be anything serviceable. The main focus, similar to other Castlevania titles, is of course going to be the gameplay and exploration experience. Now, before I heavily criticize the backtracking and castle exploration for this game, what I want to say for the base level combat is it's actually pretty fun. I really like playing as Juice throughout Harmony of Dissonance. Despite the fact that the castle structure is pretty abysmal across the two castles and the backtracking is horrendous, playing as Juice himself with the Vampire Killer Whip is actually pretty fun. Juice has a slide this time around that you can use to navigate corridors and blast through enemies pretty quickly. He can jump, strafe. He has his whip. He has a backdash that he can use to avoid enemies. You can equip weapons to... You can equip equipment to him as well, like traditional RPG-style Castlevania games. And this time around, because Juiced has a unique magical ability, you find these ancient elemental books throughout the castle, which you can equip to him, and along with gathering sub-weapons that are traditionally used in the series, like the axe or the knife or something along those lines, you can combine them with these magical tomes to make item crashes or unique elemental attacks. For instance, if you have the dagger in your possession, you can use the ice book in order to create a large machine gun-type projectile that can absolutely decimate and wipe out enemies. Or, if you use the holy water, you can create a devastating wave of energy that clashes over the entire screen and destroys your enemies. The combat in this game is very fun, taking out enemies, and quite honestly, I really liked playing as Juiced. That's a very positive element of the gameplay. But unfortunately, the castles that you physically explore through, as well as the backtracking to solve puzzles and progress through the story, isn't very good. This game is set up very differently from other Castlevania titles, sort of taking inspiration from the whole Symphony of the Night idea, where after you complete a certain portion of the game and the reverse castle opens up. This game, because of the story, has two different versions of Dracula's castle, Castle A and Castle B. You'll encounter multiple different warp points throughout the castle in typical Castlevania fashion, exploring through each version of them, defeating enemies, fighting bosses, finding hidden rooms with equipment, save points where you can save your progress, encountering the occasional merchant, just a step up from Circle of the Moon that had no reliable shop system to get items. And you also encounter warp points that allow you to travel between Castle A and B. Once you acquire certain items, you can make progress in one castle, and then go back to the other one to further the story. Each one has its own set of boss fights, different enemies, different enough looking locales. It's pretty unique, all things considered. But the problem is, this game is so wide and expansive across each one of the castles that the locations get extremely confusing when the game doesn't tell you where to go. You pick up a key, you find some kind of item that allows Juice to progress, you pick up an upgrade that allows you to double jump or super jump up to a higher location to progress through the game. The game doesn't tell you. In my personal experience, and everyone else's who's played Harmony of Dissonance, this gets extremely confusing where you're going to be wasting literal hours jumping back and forth between both castles trying to figure out where you can go. Because every time you pull up the map and try to go to one area that's completely blocked off that you haven't been to yet, you're roadblocked. The game doesn't tell you where to go. They include these occasional tip cards that try and give you hints about certain things. They're extremely vague and don't really help you at all. The exploration in this game, outside of the unique locations that I do enjoy across each castle, like the Crystal Cave or the Cave of Bones and all these other unique locations, the exploration just isn't fun because of the excessive backtracking. The game doesn't tell you where to go, the progression really isn't paced that well, and you waste a ton of time going between two larger maps because of the two castles, and waste so much of your time, leading to a more frustrating gameplay experience. This is something that has been heavily criticized about Harmony, and if I'm playing the game a few times now, I can definitely say this is unfortunately still an issue, and it does hinder an otherwise really fun combat experience as Juiced. And that's really all I have to say about Harmony of Dissonance, guys. Overall, this game is really okay. This really isn't one of the top games in the Castlevania series either, in my personal opinion. This game has some positive attributes to it, a decent story, fun gameplay playing as Juiced, as well as visually looking pretty good on the Gameboy Advance. But unfortunately, Koji Igarashi's first major return to a handheld Castlevania title had a ton of issues associated with it. The soundtrack is horrible, sacrificed for having better visuals on the Gameboy Advance. The exploration between the two castles and the backtracking is horrendous, not being clear on where to go and wasting so much of your time in the gameplay experience, having a bunch of lackluster boss fights that really don't add anything, and overall having so much ground to cover that quite frankly this entire game feels slow to play, along with an unreliable shop system for a shopkeeper that only appears in one location per castle, adding to the backtracking issue if you want to buy items. Overall, Harmony of Dissonance is, again, an okay game. It has a ton of issues in the gameplay and exploration department, with a few positive attributes here and there. I will say this, between Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance, I've always struggled to determine which one I think is better. Every time I think of one positive attribute for either game, I think of another issue that bogs the games down. I say they're both about equal in quality, both pretty average games, not bad, but not particularly good either. And as far as Harmony of Dissonance goes for its legacy and reputation, I would say it's definitely not one of the better Castlevania titles, but one that if you're curious and you're new to the series, check it out and form your own opinion. And that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for checking out this video of Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. I've been trying to clear up some of the Castlevania titles that I had missed on the channel throughout the years. I have one more Castlevania review left to do here for Order of Ecclesia, which I played for the first time last year. So, looking forward to getting to that review at some point here in the future. But outside of that, though, guys, thank you once again for watching this Harmony of Dissonance review. What do you think about Harmony? Do you like it? Do you not care for it? Do you disagree with my opinions and think it's one of the better games of the series? Do you agree with me in the community and think that it's one of the lower tier Castlevanias? What are your experiences? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. And if you did enjoy the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you guys want to keep up with future videos here on the channel concerning reviews, collection pickups, collaborations, and anything to do with gaming nostalgia. And that's all from me. Until next time, this has been Ryan from the Nostalgia Factor saying, keep on gaming.